The morning sun cast long shadows across the hiking trail as Marcus Chun adjusted his backpack straps and checked his water bottle. At 23, he had been hiking these mountain paths for nearly a decade, but today felt different somehow. The air carried an unusual stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Marcus worked as a wildlife photographer for Nature magazine, spending most of his time capturing images of birds, mammals, and landscapes in remote locations. His camera equipment filled most of his pack, along with emergency supplies and camping gear for what was supposed to be a 3-day solo expedition through the Cascade Range. As he rounded a bend in the trail, a sound stopped him dead in his tracks. It was a high-pitched cry, almost like a bird in distress, but with an otherworldly quality that sent shivers down his spine. The sound came again, weaker this time, from somewhere off the main path. Marcus pushed through a thicket of mountain laurel, following the source of the distress calls. In a small clearing, beneath the twisted roots of an ancient Douglas fir, he found something that defied explanation. A creature no larger than a house cat lay motionless among the fallen leaves. At first glance, it resembled a lizard, but its scales shimmered with an iridescent quality that shifted from deep emerald to sapphire blue as the sunlight filtered through the canopy above. Its body was lean and elegant, with 4 legs ending in delicate claws. But what truly captured Marcus's attention were the wings. The creature had wings like a bat, but made of the same shimmering scales as its body. The right wing was folded neatly against its side, but the left wing lay at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. A thin line of golden fluid seeped from where the wing connected to the creature's shoulder. Marcus knelt carefully beside the injured animal, his photographer's eye automatically cataloging details. The creature's head was triangular and noble, with large eyes that reflected intelligence far beyond what he had ever seen in any reptile. Those eyes were currently closed, but the shallow rise and fall of the creature's chest indicated it was still alive. He had no idea what species this could be. In all his years of wildlife photography and study, he had never encountered anything remotely like it. The creature seemed to belong more in a fantasy novel than in the mountains of Washington state. The rational part of his mind suggested he should document his find, take photographs, perhaps contact wildlife authorities. But something deeper compelled him toward a different choice. The creature was suffering, and regardless of what it was, Marcus could not simply walk away. He gently scooped the injured animal into his arms, surprised by how light it felt despite its apparent solidity. The scales were warm to the touch and had a texture unlike anything he had ever felt. Not quite like snake scales, but smoother and more refined. As he lifted the creature, its eyes fluttered open. Marcus found himself staring into pupils that seemed to contain depths of ancient wisdom. For a moment, he felt as though the creature was looking directly into his soul, evaluating his character and intentions. Then, the eyes closed again, and the creature relaxed in his arms with what seemed like trust. Marcus's cabin was still 2 hours away, but he had a first aid kit in his backpack and some experience treating injured wildlife. He had volunteered at a wildlife rehabilitation center during college, though nothing in that experience had prepared him for this. Finding a flat spot near a stream, Marcus set up an impromptu field hospital. He spread his sleeping bag on the ground and carefully placed the creature on the soft fabric. From his first aid kit, he retrieved antiseptic wipes, gauze, and medical tape. Cleaning the wound on the creature's wing revealed the extent of the injury. The wing membrane was torn in several places, and one of the delicate wing bones appeared to be fractured. Marcus worked with the utmost care, cleaning the golden fluid that continued to seep from the wounds. The creature remained still throughout the treatment, occasionally opening its eyes to watch Marcus work. There was no fear in those gaze, only a calm acceptance that somehow communicated gratitude. Using lightweight aluminum splints from his emergency kit, Marcus carefully immobilized the broken wing bone. He fashioned a sling from gauze and taped to keep the wing close to the creature's body, preventing further injury. The process took nearly 2 hours, during which the creature never once tried to bite or scratch, despite what must have been considerable pain. As the sun began to set, Marcus faced a decision. He could not leave the injured creature alone in the wilderness, but taking it to his cabin meant abandoning his planned hiking route. The choice was easy. The trek back to his cabin proved more challenging than expected. The creature, while light, was an awkward burden that required him to adjust his hiking rhythm. Several times, he stopped to check on his patient, offering small sips of water from his bottle cap. By the time they reached the cabin, full darkness had fallen. Marcus's modest retreat sat on 5 acres of wooded land, far enough from the nearest neighbor to ensure privacy for whatever recovery process lay ahead. Inside, Marcus created a comfortable nest for the creature using soft towels and an old blanket near the fireplace. He lit a small fire to provide gentle warmth and light. The creature seemed to approve of these arrangements, settling into the makeshift bed with obvious relief. Over the following days, Marcus fell into a routine of care. Every few hours, he cleaned and checked the wounds, changed bandages, and offered water. The creature showed little interest in any food he provided, politely ignoring offerings of raw fish, fruits, and vegetables. On the 3rd day, as Marcus worked at his computer editing photographs, he heard a new sound from the creature's corner. It was a soft, melodious humming, almost like a cat's purr, but more musical. When he looked over, the creature was watching him with alert, bright eyes. "Feeling better?" Marcus asked, feeling somewhat foolish for talking to what was essentially a wild animal. To his amazement, the creature tilted its head in what appeared to be a nod. Over the next week, their relationship deepened into something Marcus had never experienced with any animal. The creature displayed remarkable intelligence, seeming to understand much of what Marcus said. It learned to drink from a shallow bowl, though it still showed no interest in any food offered. Marcus began talking to the creature during their daily wound care sessions, sharing stories about his work, his life, his dreams of capturing the perfect wildlife photograph. The creature listened with focused attention, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to indicate understanding or agreement. "I wish I knew what you were," Marcus said one evening as he gently cleaned the healing wing. "I've been through every field guide, every wildlife database I can find. You don't exist in any scientific literature." The creature fixed him with those ancient eyes and made a sound that seemed almost like laughter. As the 2nd week progressed, Marcus noticed significant changes. The creature's wounds were healing with remarkable speed, and the wing that had been so badly damaged now showed only faint scars where the tears had been. The bone appeared to have mended completely. More surprising was the creature's growth. It had doubled in size since Marcus first found it, now roughly the size of a small dog. Its movements had become more coordinated and confident. On a Tuesday morning, Marcus woke to find the creature standing at the cabin's large picture window, staring out at the forest with an expression of longing. "Want to try going outside?" Marcus asked. The creature turned to him and definitely nodded. Marcus opened the cabin door and followed as the creature stepped onto the wooden deck. It stretched its wings carefully, testing the range of motion. The wingspan was now nearly 4 feet across, and in the morning sunlight, the scales seemed to glow with inner fire. The creature looked up at Marcus, made a sound that somehow conveyed thanks and farewell, and launched itself from the deck. Marcus watched in wonder as the creature soared above the treetops with powerful wing beats. It circled the cabin 3 times, each pass lower than the last, before landing briefly on the deck railing. For a moment, creature and man regarded each other in silence. Then, with a final musical call, the creature took flight again, disappearing into the morning sky. Marcus stood on his deck for a long time after it vanished, wondering if he had dreamed the entire experience. But the empty towel bed by the fireplace and the small collection of iridescent scales he had saved proved otherwise. That evening, he sat at his computer, staring at a blank document. How could he possibly write about what had happened? Who would believe such a story? Instead, he saved the account as a private file and returned to his regular work. Life resumed its normal pattern. Marcus completed his photography assignments, submitted articles to magazines, and planned new expeditions. But something fundamental had changed. He found himself scanning the skies more often, listening for unusual sounds in the forest, and feeling as though he was waiting for something without knowing what. Months passed. Marcus never saw the creature again, though he sometimes found unusual scales near his cabin or heard distant musical calls on quiet nights. He began to think of the experience as a beautiful chapter in his life that had come to its natural conclusion. Winter arrived early that year, bringing heavy snows that isolated the cabin for weeks at a time. Marcus used the solitude to organize years of accumulated photographs and work on a book project about mountain wildlife. One particularly cold night in February, as wind howled around the cabin and snow pelted the windows, Marcus was startled by a sound at his door. It was not the typical scratching of raccoons or the bumping of deer, but rather a deliberate, rhythmic tapping. He opened the door cautiously, prepared to shoo away whatever animal was seeking shelter. Instead, he found himself face to face with a young woman who appeared to be in her early 20s. She stood in the falling snow wearing clothes that seemed oddly formal for the wilderness, a long coat that appeared to be made of some kind of scaled leather, fitted pants, and boots that looked both practical and elegant. Her dark hair was streaked with unusual highlights that seemed to shift color in the porch light. But it was her eyes that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. They were the same ancient, intelligent eyes he had gazed into months earlier, now set in a perfectly human face. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the same musical quality as the creature's calls. "I believe we need to talk." Marcus stared at her for several long moments, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "You're the hatchling you saved," she confirmed with a small smile. "My name is Lyra, and I owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid." She stepped forward slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of something beneath her coat, the edge of what looked like a wing. "May I come in?" she asked. "There are things you need to know, and I'm afraid the situation has become somewhat urgent." Marcus stepped aside wordlessly, allowing her to enter the warm cabin. As she removed her coat, his suspicions were confirmed. Folded against her back were wings, the same iridescent, scale-covered wings he had so carefully tended months earlier, now sized to match her human form. Lyra settled into the chair near the fireplace, the same spot where Marcus had cared for her injured form. In the flickering light, her features seemed to shift subtly, sometimes appearing fully human, other times revealing hints of the draconic nature beneath. "You have questions," she said. "That's understandable. But first, I need you to know that by saving me, you've become involved in something much larger than either of us initially realized." Marcus sat across from her, trying to reconcile the small, injured creature he had nursed with the poised young woman before him. "What are you?" "I'm what your myths call a dragon," Lyra said simply. "Though we are not the monsters your stories suggest. We are an ancient race, older than human civilization, and we have lived alongside your kind in secret for millennia." She paused, studying his reaction. Marcus found that he was surprisingly calm, as if some part of him had always known this conversation would come. "When you found me," Lyra continued, "I was in my natural juvenile form. Young dragons spend their first century in that shape before we develop the ability to take human form. The injury I sustained should have been fatal, but your care allowed me to survive until my healing abilities matured." "Why are you here now?" Marcus asked. Lyra's expression grew serious. "Because others of my kind have learned of your existence, and not all of them view humans as kindly as I have learned to. There's a faction among my people who believe that any human who learns of our existence poses a threat that must be eliminated." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside. "Are you saying I'm in danger?" "We both are," Lyra replied. "By choosing to return to you in my human form, I have violated ancient laws. But I could not allow you to face what's coming without warning or protection. She leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the firelight in a way that was definitely not human. Marcus, there are others coming. They will arrive within days, and when they do, they will test your character as I was tested when you found me. The difference is that they will come not as vulnerable creatures needing help, but as judges determining whether you deserve to live or die. The cabin suddenly felt much smaller and more isolated than it ever had before. Marcus looked out the windows at the snowy forest, wondering what other eyes might be watching from the darkness. "What do I need to do?" he asked. Lyra's question hung in the air between them as Marcus tried to absorb everything she had told him. The fire crackled in the silence, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. "The others who are coming," Lyra explained, settling back in her chair, "are members of what we call the Council of Scales. They are the governing body of our kind, responsible for maintaining the secrecy that has protected both our races for thousands of years." Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee with hands that were steadier than he felt. "How many others like you are there?" "Fewer than you might imagine," Lyra said. "Perhaps 3,000 worldwide, scattered across every continent. We live long lives. I am barely past my first century, which makes me little more than a child by our standards. The council members who are coming are ancient beings, some over 2 millennia old." She paused to watch the flames in the fireplace, her expression distant. When a human discovers our existence, the traditional response is swift and decisive. Memories are erased, or in cases where that proves impossible. She let the sentence hang unfinished. Marcus set down his coffee cup. "You're talking about murder." "I'm talking about survival," Lyra corrected gently. "For thousands of years, humans hunted us nearly to extinction. Your legends and myths are based on those dark times when fear ruled both our kinds. The secrecy we maintain now is not just tradition. It is the foundation of peace." She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered forest. "But you changed something when you saved me, Marcus. In all our recorded history, no human has ever aided a dragon without first knowing what they were helping. Your actions were motivated purely by compassion for a suffering creature." Marcus joined her at the window. In the moonlight, the familiar landscape looked different, as if it might conceal wonders or terrors he had never imagined. "The council doesn't know what to make of you," Lyra continued. "Some see you as a potential ally, someone who might bridge the gap between our peoples. Others view you as an anomaly that threatens our carefully maintained balance." "Which side do you fall on?" Marcus asked. Lyra turned to face him, and in the dim light, he could see hints of her draconic nature in the way her eyes reflected the moon. "I believe that kindness transcends species, but my voice carries little weight in the council. I am young, inexperienced, and now considered compromised because of my attachment to you." The next morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Marcus woke to find Lyra standing on his deck in her natural form, wings spread to catch the morning sun. She was larger now than when she had left months earlier, roughly the size of a horse, with scales that seemed to contain captured sunlight. When she noticed him watching through the glass door, she shifted back to human form with a fluidity that still amazed him. "I was surveying the area," she explained as she came inside. "They will arrive today, most likely by noon." Marcus had spent much of the night lying awake, trying to prepare mentally for whatever was coming. "What should I expect?" "3 of them will come," Lyra said. "Eldest Karath, who has led the council for 8 centuries. Sage Valana, the keeper of our laws and traditions. And war leader Theron, who oversees our security and has little patience for human complications." She moved to the kitchen area and began preparing tea with movements that suggested this was ritual rather than mere refreshment. "They will test you, Marcus. Not just your knowledge or your intentions, but the core of who you are. Dragons have abilities beyond shape-changing. We can sense emotions, read the patterns of a person's thoughts, even glimpse the fundamental nature of their soul." Marcus watched her work, noting the grace and precision in every gesture. Is there anything I should or shouldn't say? Be honest, Lyra advised. They will know instantly if you attempt deception. Be respectful, but do not grovel. Dragons respect strength of character above submission. Most importantly, be yourself. It was your authentic nature that moved me to trust you, and that same authenticity is your best defense now. As the morning progressed, Marcus found himself repeatedly checking the skies. He had moved his photography equipment and personal items to create space in the cabin's main room, following Lyra's suggestion that the meeting should feel formal, but not intimidating. At precisely 11:30, Lyra stiffened and moved to the window. They come. Marcus looked out, but saw only empty sky. Then, as he watched, three dark shapes appeared high above the tree line, circling in a descending spiral that would bring them to his property. Even at a distance, the newcomers were clearly different from Lyra. They were massive, their wingspans easily 3 times hers. Their scales seemed darker, more metallic, and they moved with the confidence of apex predators who had never known fear. The first to land was a dragon of deep crimson that seemed almost black in the forest shadows. Its head was massive and noble, with horns that curved back like a crown. When it folded its wings, Marcus could see battle scars crisscrossing the powerful limbs. The second dragon was silver-white, smaller than the first, but radiating an aura of intense intellect. Its movements were precise and calculated, and its pale eyes seemed to catalog every detail of the surroundings. The third dragon was gold and bronze, with a wingspan that blocked out the sun when it spread its wings. Even after landing, it maintained an alert, almost aggressive posture that suggested readiness for immediate action. Lyra stepped onto the deck and bowed deeply toward the 3 newcomers. They acknowledged her with barely perceptible nods before fixing their attention on Marcus, who stood in his doorway, feeling very small and very mortal. The red dragon spoke first, its voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. Human, I am Karath, eldest of the Council of Scales. You will invite us into your dwelling so that we may conduct our business properly. It was phrased as a command, but Marcus sensed this was actually a test. You are welcome in my home, he replied, stepping aside to gesture them in. The 3 ancient dragons shifted to human form with a fluidity that made Lyra's transformations seem clumsy by comparison. The forms they chose were imposing, tall figures in elaborate clothing that seemed to be cut from the same scaled leather as their natural skins. Karath appeared as a man in his middle years with iron-gray hair and eyes like burning coals. Valana took the form of a woman with silver hair and features that suggested both beauty and dangerous intelligence. Theron's human form was younger, but broader, with the bearing of a career soldier. They arranged themselves in Marcus's living room with the same formation they had used while circling overhead, Karath in the center, the other 2 flanking him. Lyra took a position slightly behind and to the side, clearly acknowledging her junior status. Karath studied Marcus for a long moment before speaking. You stand accused, human, of discovering the existence of our kind and living with that knowledge for over 6 months. According to our laws, this crime is punishable by death or memory erasure, so complete that you would retain no sense of your own identity. Marcus felt his mouth go dry, but he forced himself to maintain eye contact with the ancient dragon. I understand. Do you? Valana interjected, her voice carrying the crisp precision of someone accustomed to cutting through elaborate arguments to reach the truth. Do you understand what it means that creatures of legend walk among your kind undetected? Do you comprehend the delicate balance that would be shattered if knowledge of our existence became widespread? Marcus considered her questions carefully. I understand that there would be fear on both sides. Humans would see you as threats to be eliminated or prizes to be captured. Some of you would view us the same way. The result would probably be war. Theron leaned forward, his expression skeptical. Yet you saved one of us when you believed we were merely unknown animals. Why should we trust that you would continue to act with such restraint, knowing what you now know? Marcus glanced at Lyra, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Because the knowledge doesn't change who I am or what I believe. I helped an injured creature because it was suffering, not because I expected anything in return. Learning that the creature was a dragon doesn't retroactively make my actions calculated or selfish. Karath made a sound that might have been approval or skepticism. Pretty words, human. But words are cheap, and we have heard them before from your kind. Tell us of your life before you encountered our young one. Tell us who you are when no one is watching. For the next hour, Marcus found himself subjected to the most intense questioning he had ever experienced. The three council members probed every aspect of his history, his motivations, his fears, and his dreams. They asked about his relationship with his family, his approach to his work, his treatment of animals, his political beliefs, and his response to moral dilemmas. What made the questioning particularly unsettling was that Marcus could feel their attention like a physical weight. It was as if they were reading not just his words, but his thoughts, his emotions, the very essence of his character. You live alone by choice, Valana observed. You have no wife, no children, no close human relationships that would be jeopardized by keeping our secret. This suggests either antisocial tendencies or perhaps a calculated preparation for a life of deception. Marcus shook his head. I live alone because I find peace in solitude, and because my work requires long periods in remote locations. I have friends and family that I care about, but I've never felt the need to center my life around other people's expectations. Including ours? Theron asked pointedly. I hope it doesn't come to that. Marcus replied honestly. But yes, including yours. I won't be bullied into agreeing that my life has less value than your secrecy, even though I understand why the secrecy matters. The room fell silent. Marcus could feel the weight of ancient eyes measuring him, judging him, deciding his fate. Beside him, Lyra remained motionless, but he sensed her tension. Finally, Karath spoke. You intrigue us, human. In 800 years of leadership, I have never encountered a member of your species who acknowledged our power while refusing to be cowed by it. Valana nodded slowly. The patterns of your thoughts suggest sincerity rather than calculation. You speak truth as you understand it, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Theron remained skeptical. Truth and good intentions are not enough. How do we know you will not change? How do we know that someday you will not decide that fame or fortune matters more than the life of the dragon you saved? Marcus met the war leader's gaze steadily. You don't. Just like I don't know that you won't decide someday that my death is more convenient than my continued silence. Trust is a choice that requires courage from everyone involved. The three council members exchanged glances that seemed to communicate volumes. Marcus got the impression that entire conversations were taking place in the space between heartbeats. Karath stood and moved to the window, looking out at the forest where Lyra had first taken flight after her recovery. There is precedent, he said finally, though it dates back nearly a millennium. There have been humans who were allowed to live with knowledge of our kind, humans who served as bridges between our peoples in times of great need. The age of such alliances ended badly, Theron pointed out. The last human who was trusted with our secrets betrayed that trust for gold and glory. The wars that followed cost both our races dearly. But that was not the fault of all humans any more than the current council is responsible for the actions of dragons from centuries past, Valana observed. Perhaps it is time to consider whether our isolation has become more prison than protection. Lyra spoke for the first time since the questioning began. Elders, Marcus has had months to reveal what he knows. He has had access to communication methods that could spread the knowledge worldwide within hours. Yet he has chosen silence without coercion, without reward, without even knowing that others like me existed. Karath turned from the window. The question becomes not whether this human can be trusted, but whether our kind is ready to risk trust again. The discussion that followed was conducted partially in English and partially in what Marcus assumed was the Draconic language, a series of musical tones and sounds that seemed to convey meaning beyond what human language could express. Marcus found himself in the strange position of listening to beings debate whether he should be allowed to continue existing. The surreal nature of the situation was not lost on him, but he forced himself to remain calm and alert. Finally, Karath returned his attention to Marcus. "We have reached a decision, human. You will be allowed to live and retain your memories, but under conditions that are not negotiable." Marcus nodded, relief flooding through him despite the serious tone. "First," Valana continued, "you will never reveal our existence to any other human without explicit permission from the Council. This extends to written records, digital files, photographs, or any other form of documentation. Second," Theron added, "you will serve as a point of contact between our peoples when such contact becomes necessary. This may require you to assist in situations that place you in considerable danger." Karath delivered the final condition. "Third, you will accept Lyra as your permanent liaison to our people. She will remain in this area to monitor the situation and provide protection as needed." Marcus looked at Lyra, who seemed as surprised by this last condition as he was. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Karath explained, "that your fates are now linked. Lyra will answer to the Council for your actions, just as you will be responsible for her safety and integration into human society." Lyra bowed again toward the elders. "I'm honored by your trust." Valana's expression suggested this arrangement was as much punishment as honor. "Do not mistake necessity for trust, young one. You have forced our hand by revealing yourself. Now you must live with the consequences." The three council members began moving toward the door, their business apparently concluded. Theron paused to deliver one final warning to Marcus. "Understand, human, that this arrangement can be terminated at any time we deem necessary. Cross us, betray us, or simply prove unworthy of our faith, and the consequences will be swift and final." Marcus nodded understanding. "May I ask one question?" Karath raised an eyebrow. "Speak. Why take the risk? Why not just erase my memory and be done with it?" The ancient dragon smiled for the first time, an expression that was both terrifying and oddly warm. "Because, human, change is the nature of all living things. Perhaps it is time for our peoples to stop hiding from each other and start learning to coexist." With that, the three elders shifted back to their draconic forms and launched themselves into the afternoon sky. Marcus and Lyra stood on the deck, watching until the figures disappeared into the distance. "Well," Marcus said finally, "that could have gone worse." Lyra laughed, a sound that mixed her human voice with musical draconic tones. "Much worse. I was certain Theron would insist on your memory being erased." Marcus looked at her curiously. "What changed their minds?" "You did," she replied. "When you refused to be intimidated while still showing respect for their power. When you spoke of trust requiring courage from everyone involved. Those words carried weight with beings who have lived through centuries of fear and mistrust." As they went back inside the cabin, Marcus realized that his quiet life in the mountains had just become infinitely more complicated. But as he watched Lyra move around his home with comfortable familiarity, he found that he was not entirely sorry about the change. 6 months after the council's visit, Marcus had grown accustomed to sharing his mountain retreat with a dragon. Lyra had proven to be an ideal housemate in most respects, quiet, clean, and surprisingly helpful with practical matters like maintenance and gardening. Her draconic strength made quick work of tasks that would have taken Marcus hours, and her enhanced senses had prevented several potential problems with wildlife and weather. Their relationship had evolved into something Marcus struggled to define. Lyra was clearly more than a simple roommate, but calling her a friend seemed inadequate given her non-human nature and the ancient wisdom she carried. She had become something like a partner, though in what endeavor he was still discovering. The arrangement had its challenges. Lyra's natural form required significantly more space than the cabin comfortably provided, so she spent most of her time in human shape. However, she needed regular flight time to maintain her physical and mental health, which meant Marcus had grown accustomed to seeing a dragon launch from his property several times a week. More complex was the gradual revelation of just how different their species truly were. Dragons, Marcus learned, experience time differently than humans. What seemed like a casual conversation to him might represent hours of careful consideration from Lyra's perspective. Their emotional responses operated on different scales as well. Events that would upset Marcus for days might affect Lyra for weeks, while things that caused him intense stress might barely register in her awareness. Yet somehow, they had found a rhythm that worked for both of them. Marcus's photography had taken an unexpected turn as well. While he couldn't document dragons directly, Lyra's presence had opened his eyes to details in the natural world he had never noticed before. His recent work showed a depth and insight that his editors praised, but couldn't quite explain. This peaceful routine was shattered on a Tuesday morning in early autumn when Lyra burst into the cabin in an obvious state of agitation. "Marcus, we have a problem," she announced, shifting from her draconic form to human as she spoke. "A big one." Marcus looked up from his computer where he had been editing photos from a recent assignment. "What's wrong?" 3 nights ago, a young dragon named Kale disappeared from his territory in the Canadian Rockies. Yesterday, his remains were found by a council search party. Lyra paced across the room, her distress obvious in every movement. He had been killed by humans using weapons specifically designed to harm our kind. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Dragon hunters? I thought that was ancient history." "So did we," Lyra replied grimly. The weapons found near Kale's body were modern, sophisticated, and incorporated elements that suggest detailed knowledge of dragon physiology. "Someone has been studying us, preparing for this." Marcus saved his work and closed the laptop. "What does the council want us to do?" "That's the complicated part," Lyra said, finally settling into her usual chair near the fireplace. "The council is split between those who want to retreat deeper into hiding and those who believe it's time to take a more active role in protecting our kind. Meanwhile, evidence suggests the hunters are moving south into the United States." She paused, studying Marcus's reaction. "There's more. The hunters appear to be targeting young dragons specifically, those who are still learning to shift between forms. They're vulnerable during the transformation, easier to track, and less experienced in combat." Marcus understood the implications immediately. "They're going after dragons like you were when I found you." "Exactly. And there are 17 young dragons currently living in territories between here and the Canadian border." Lyra's eyes held the same ancient depths Marcus remembered from their first meeting, but now they also carried a weight of responsibility he had not seen before. "The council has decided that human assistance is necessary to combat this threat." "What kind of assistance?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The hunters are human, which means they move through human society, use human resources, and think like humans. The council needs someone who understands your people, someone who can track them using methods our kind cannot." Marcus stood and moved to the window, looking out at the forest that had become his sanctuary. "You're talking about hunting the hunters." "I'm talking about stopping a genocide before it begins," Lyra corrected. "These aren't random killers, Marcus. The organization behind this is well-funded, well-informed, and completely dedicated to our extermination. If we don't act soon, they'll escalate from targeting individuals to attempting mass killings." Marcus had been dreading this conversation since the council's visit. He had known that eventually his comfortable arrangement with Lyra would be tested by larger events. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Lyra joined him at the window. "The first step is gathering intelligence." The hunters left traces at the kill site: equipment, vehicles, communication devices. Some of it was damaged in the fight, but the council's technical specialists have recovered enough data to identify possible leads. She handed him a tablet displaying what looked like partial license plate numbers, incomplete phone records, and fragments of electronic communications. These clues point to human networks that a dragon could never penetrate. We need someone who can move through human society without suspicion, someone who can ask questions and access information that would be impossible for us to obtain. Marcus studied the data, his photographer's eye automatically cataloging details and patterns. This is going to require travel, probably extensive investigation, and definitely putting myself in danger. Yes, Lyra acknowledged. I won't lie to you about the risks. These people have already demonstrated their willingness to kill, and they won't hesitate to eliminate a human who interferes with their plans. And you? Where you go, I go, Lyra said simply. That was the council's condition, remember? Your safety is my responsibility, just as my integration into human society is yours. Marcus smiled despite the seriousness of the situation. I think they got that arrangement backwards. You're the one with supernatural strength, flight, and who knows what other abilities. Perhaps, Lyra replied, but you're the one who understands how humans think, how they organize, how they hide. In this situation, those skills may be more valuable than physical power. Over the following days, Marcus and Lyra developed their investigation strategy. Using his credentials as a nature photographer, Marcus could travel to remote locations without attracting suspicion. His cover would allow him to ask questions about unusual activity in wilderness areas, strange equipment, or unfamiliar vehicles. Lyra would remain in human form during their travels, posing as his research assistant. Her enhanced senses would allow her to detect traces of dragon presence or evidence of violence that human investigators might miss. Their first destination was a small town in northern Montana, near where Kale had been killed. The drive took them through spectacular mountain scenery that reminded Marcus of how much larger the world had become since meeting Lyra. As they traveled, Lyra shared more details about dragon society and the specific threats they faced. The hunter organization called itself the Order of the Silver Lance, apparently named after an ancient weapon that had been used against dragons in medieval times. The order isn't new, Lyra explained as they drove through a mountain pass. Our historians have records going back 5 centuries of humans who dedicated themselves to hunting our kind. We thought they had been extinct for nearly 200 years. Marcus navigated a hairpin turn while processing this information. What changed? Why are they active again? Technology, Lyra said simply. Modern communication allows them to coordinate across vast distances. Satellite imagery and thermal detection make it harder for us to hide. Advanced material science has given them weapons that can actually harm us. She stared out at the passing landscape. But most importantly, they have patience and planning that previous generations lacked. Instead of rushing in with torches and swords, they study us, learn our habits, identify our weaknesses. How do they even know dragons exist? Marcus asked. I thought secrecy was your greatest protection. It is, which is why this situation is so alarming, Lyra replied. Someone has been providing them with information, detailed, accurate information that could only come from extensive observation or, Marcus prompted when she hesitated. Or from a dragon, Lyra finished quietly. The council fears that one of our own has turned against us. They reached the town of Cedar Falls just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. The community was typical of many remote locations Marcus had visited, a few hundred residents, most employed by logging or tourism, and the kind of place where strangers were noticed but not necessarily questioned if they had reasonable explanations for their presence. Marcus checked them into a small motel and immediately began his cover story. He introduced himself to the clerk as a photographer working on a book about mountain wildlife, claiming to be particularly interested in rare bird sightings in the area. The approach worked exactly as planned. Within an hour, the clerk had provided detailed directions to several remote locations, along with warnings about areas where strange things had been happening lately. Weird lights in the sky, the clerk explained. Helicopter activity where there shouldn't be helicopters. Fish, and game says they don't know anything about it, but local hunters have been finding dead animals that look like they were killed by something that wasn't natural. Marcus exchanged glances with Lyra, who was playing her role as research assistant perfectly. Dead animals? Burned, the clerk said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Not like forest fire burned, but burned from the inside out. Old Tom Mackenzie found a deer last week that was still smoking 2 days after it died. Marcus made notes while projecting the kind of intense curiosity that nature photographers were expected to display. Could you show me on a map where these incidents have been occurring? The next morning, armed with detailed local knowledge, Marcus and Lyra set out to investigate the sites where unusual activity had been reported. Their first stop was the location where the burned deer had been discovered. Lyra confirmed what Marcus had suspected. The animal had been killed by dragon fire, specifically the flame of a young dragon under extreme stress. Scorch patterns on nearby trees indicated that Cale had fought desperately before being overwhelmed by his attackers. The hunters used some kind of net or snare to limit his movement, Lyra observed, pointing to gouges in the tree bark where claws had scraped frantically. Then, they kept him grounded long enough to deploy whatever weapon actually killed him. Marcus photographed everything, ostensibly for his wildlife book, but actually to provide documentation for the council. The scene painted a picture of calculated cruelty that made his stomach turn. Their investigation continued over the following days, gradually revealing the scope and sophistication of the Order's operation. The hunters had established a temporary base in an abandoned mining facility 20 miles from town. They had used helicopter transport to move equipment and personnel, maintaining communication through encrypted radio frequencies. Most disturbing was the evidence that they had been tracking multiple dragons in the region. Maps recovered from a discarded equipment cache showed detailed flight patterns for at least 6 different individuals, along with notes about their habits and vulnerabilities. "They've been watching us for months," Lyra said as they examined the maps by flashlight in the abandoned facility. "Look at this. They knew exactly when Cale would be vulnerable, where he liked to hunt, even the route he usually took between his feeding grounds and his sleeping cave." Marcus studied the meticulous records. This level of surveillance requires significant resources and coordination. "We're not dealing with a handful of fanatics operating out of someone's basement." Lyra nodded grimly. "The council needs to know about this immediately. But first, we need to follow the trail these people left when they moved to their next target." The hunter's departure from the mining facility had been carefully planned, but not perfect. Marcus's experience tracking wildlife served him well as he identified vehicle tracks, equipment debris, and other signs of their passage. The trail led south toward the Idaho border, following back roads that would allow the hunters to avoid main highways and surveillance cameras. Along the way, Marcus and Lyra discovered evidence of increasing urgency in the hunters' movements, abandoned equipment, hasty campsites, and communication intercepts that suggested they were accelerating their timeline. "Something's pushing them to move faster," Marcus observed as they studied radio intercepts that Lyra had managed to decode. These messages suggest they're under pressure to complete their mission within a specific time frame. Lyra's expression was troubled. "There's something else, Marcus. The communication patterns suggest they know they're being pursued. Someone has told them that the council is actively hunting them." Marcus felt a chill as the implication sank in. "The traitor you mentioned, they're still feeding information to the Order." "It appears so," Lyra confirmed, "which means our investigation may have been compromised from the beginning." As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's satellite phone rang. The device was a gift from the council, designed to provide secure communication even in remote locations. Lyra answered, her face growing increasingly pale as she listened to the voice on the other end. Finally, she hung up and turned to Marcus with an expression of barely controlled panic. "That was Karath," she said. 3 more young dragons have gone missing in the past 48 hours. All from territories along the route we've been following." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. They're not just hunting randomly anymore. They're conducting a systematic campaign. "And we're running out of time to stop them," Lyra added. "Karath is mobilizing every available council member for a direct assault on the Order's operations." If we're going to find them before that happens, it has to be now. Marcus packed their gear quickly while Lyra used her enhanced senses to scan the area for any immediate threats. As they prepared to leave the abandoned mining facility, both knew they were crossing a line from investigation to active combat. The trail led them deeper into the mountains, toward a region where the borders of 3 states met and government authority was thin on the ground. Perfect territory for an organization that needed to operate outside normal law enforcement oversight. As they drove through increasingly remote terrain, Marcus found himself thinking about the young dragon he had saved months earlier. The innocent creature that had trusted him completely was now preparing for a war that could determine the survival of her entire species. "Lyra," he said as they navigated a particularly treacherous mountain road, "whatever happens next, I want you to know that saving you was the best thing I've ever done." She reached over and squeezed his hand, her touch warm despite the cold mountain air. "The story isn't over yet, Marcus. We still have work to do." Ahead of them, the road disappeared into a tunnel of trees, leading toward whatever final confrontation awaited. Marcus pressed the accelerator and drove into the gathering darkness, knowing that when morning came, nothing would ever be the same. The GPS coordinates from the intercepted communications led them to a valley that appeared empty except for an old logging road. However, Lyra's enhanced hearing detected the hum of generators and electronic equipment hidden among the trees. They left their vehicle a mile away and approached on foot, using Marcus's wilderness skills and Lyra's supernatural senses to avoid detection. What they discovered exceeded their worst fears. The Order had established a major operations center in a series of interconnected bunkers, camouflaged so effectively that even satellite surveillance would miss them. Through careful observation, they counted at least 50 personnel, along with vehicles, aircraft, and weapon systems that clearly represented millions of dollars in investment. More horrifying were the cages, large, reinforced enclosures designed to hold captured dragons. 3 were currently occupied. "We need backup," Marcus whispered as they observed from a concealed position. "This is way beyond what the 2 of us can handle." Lyra was already activating her emergency beacon, sending a signal that would alert every council member within 1,000 miles. "Help is coming, but it will take hours to arrive. Those dragons may not have hours." Marcus studied the facility's layout, his mind automatically cataloging defensive positions, guard rotations, and potential approaches. There might be another way. He pulled out his camera and began documenting everything they could see. "If we can't rescue them ourselves, maybe we can at least gather enough intelligence to make the Council's assault more effective." What he saw through his telephoto lens made his blood run cold. The Order wasn't just hunting dragons. They were studying them, experimenting on them, learning how to break the ancient creatures both physically and psychologically. "Lyra," Marcus said quietly, "I think I understand why they've been accelerating their timeline. They're not just trying to kill dragons. They're trying to break the secret that has protected your people for millennia." Lyra looked at him with growing horror. "What do you mean?" Marcus showed her the photographs on his camera's display screen. "Look at the equipment, the documentation, the way they're treating their prisoners. They're preparing to announce your existence to the world, but on their terms, with dragons presented as monsters that need to be exterminated." As the full scope of the Order's plan became clear, both Marcus and Lyra realized that the war for the future of 2 species was about to begin, and they had found themselves at ground zero. The distant sound of approaching aircraft told them that the Council was finally mobilizing for open conflict. The age of secrecy was ending one way or another. Marcus checked his camera equipment one last time, knowing that documenting what happened next might be the most important photographs he would ever take. The story that had begun with a single act of kindness toward an injured creature was about to become the first chapter in a new age for both their kinds. In the distance, dragon wings blotted out the stars as the Council's forces arrived to reclaim their own and determine the future of their species. The final confrontation was about to begin.